Talking about Christina, so I'm going to move on to the Banner Saga now. And I love the instrumentation of the Banner Saga so much. Was she involved in that? Because I loved
Kristen,
all the...
you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, on the
I loved
third
all
one.
the horns.
She actually only joined in the party on the third, by the time of the third game, which is coming soon. Let's make it not one of those that no one ever played. But yeah, she is heavily featured as kind of the central soloist of the third one, except it's not one instrument. It's every time we hear her, it's a composite of 4 instruments.
Okay.
I worked on a game called Absolver with her in a similar capacity where we created a kind of instrument by layering a lot of instruments, and that became our formula.
Yeah.
And we kind of approached Banner Saga 3 in a similar manner, but I'm perhaps getting ahead of myself on it. But yes, she, needless to say, is heavily featured, but otherwise it was all, the orchestra in the room, basically.
So, because it's based on Norse mythology.
Correct.
And so how much research did you do around the instrumental palette you were going to use, what instruments you were going to choose, or was it really just gut instinct as to...
Sort of halfway in between. I mean, it's inspired by Norse mythology, but it is not a Norse mythology game.
Yeah.
So the characters are kind of Viking-esque, but it takes place in a completely made-up mythical, almost like Middle Earth or something. It's its own world. It's not our world. Yeah. And nor is it the world of Viking mythology either, which is more or less our world anyway. But, other than, all the mythology part of it, I suppose, but landscape-wise. And so I was not under any direction to kind of make it authentically Viking. Yeah. But even if I had, it turns out there's not really much there. I mean, it's one of those that archaeologically they know so little about what that music would have been. There's a few instruments that have been recovered from various graves and things like that. And they can infer from their design what the music might have sounded like in terms of what speaks best within the design of that instrument, but there's certainly no record of written music or anything like that. So the whole concept of Viking music is largely a mystery anyway. Yeah. But it wasn't an issue. I did a little research. There's an instrument that is kind of associated with the Vikings called a Buccahorn, which is basically just a lamb's, like a shofar. Yeah. It's a lamb's horn that's been hollowed out and finger holes drilled into it. And there's a musician I know in LA named Noah Gladstone who's primarily gigs as a trombonist, but like Kristen, he loves to collect instruments and he plays 1,000 different things. Yeah. And he's always looking for an excuse to buy more. And so I said, have you ever heard of a Buccahorn? And of course he was like, yeah. And he says there's one guy on the planet that makes good ones, and you have to order it 6 months in advance because he raises a lamb and harvests the horn. It's the craziest thing. And so I had 2 years on the Banner Saga, so I said, well, let's put in an order. And he literally has a custom Banner Saga Buccahorn. We used it in all 3 games.
Oh, wow.
And it's so cool. It can literally only play 6 notes. So I was locked into F sharp minor or anything compatible with that. But I use it extensively in the score, especially because there's a folk song. The score is almost 2 different productions. There's the orchestral score, but then kind of like the murder ballads concept in AC. There's songs that are, even though the game doesn't ever really there's no vocal lip syncing or anything like that. It's like this animated kind of tapestry. There's this implication that the characters themselves are singing. And it was a pitch I made to the writers early on where there's these big gravestones you walk past that they call the godstones that honor the kind of lost gods. And I said, what if there's text in Icelandic about these gods? And it was one of those, the game had launched initially as a Kickstarter. So we actually, one of the expensive items was to write the lore for these characters, and they'll draw the god based on you. And so all these big bearded Viking looking guys came out of the woodwork, all of whom had $1,000. And so they all these godstones are based on these real, very brutish looking guys. And they would develop the mythology themselves as part of the kind of community building of the game. And so then I would write lyrics and have them translated into Icelandic, and we recorded various singers, and I also begrudgingly made a lot of my American singers have to learn how to phonetically pronounce Icelandic, which turns out is wildly difficult. And singing, it's creating the implication it's the characters singing. And it's almost a whole separate thread, but that's where you really hear the Buccahorn, because it feels like such a folk instrument that it made sense that it would be almost like there's an actual Buccahornist in the characters of the game somewhere, that kind of thing.
Did you know when you started on one that there was going to be 3?
Yeah, they pitched it as a trilogy. In fact, Well, and this can segue into playing these excerpts if you like, because not only did I know that, but they walked me through the storyline of all 3 games in our first meeting. And so I was able to know where certain themes needed to end, not just at the end of the first game, but by the end of the entire trilogy, which was so nice, because if I hadn't known that, I wouldn't have been able to kind of puppeteer what I really wanted to, because, it's the story is a slight spoiler, forgive me. It's kind of a love story when all is said and done. But there are themes that I introduced very much outside of the context of what you would think of as a love theme that then pay off in the third game that way. So it was essential to the process.
So we're going to get a sneak peek now of Banner Saga 3 music.
I would like that very much. It would be a lot of fun. So which do you want to go with? So we have our two
I don't
principal
know, because
options.
I said Heroes, but you said Juno, so it's your show. You go for it.
All right, somebody say a number 1 or 2.
2.
2. Okay, 2. So we'll go with Juno. So you lose. That's okay. This was Anhila's vote. So all right. So that is it's a theme that you hear in all 3 games, but you hear it very minimally in the first 2 games, and then it becomes essentially the main theme. And actually, good call, whoever anonymous helper who yelled 2 first. That is also what Kristen's main featured role is. So we actually get to hear the thing we were talking about, and we don't get to do the talking about music is like dancing about architecture thing. So that's good. So actually, I'll play. It's very simple. It's an offshoot of the main theme. This is Sir Elton John's piano, for fuck's sake, so please have some mercy. This is not intimidating. So the main theme of the game is very simple. So that's sort of your central theme that ties it all together. So as an offshoot of that is this theme for these 2 characters that are named Juno and Ivan, who you meet partway through the first game. And they're almost like wizards, or, Gandalf-type characters. They're called Menders in Valka, within the mythology of the Banner Saga, but they're magic caster types. And we know very little about them for the first 2 games. And so I wrote a variation on the main theme that is something that whenever they show up, we kind of hint at it. So here's how it sounds. Very simple. I mean, and usually you just hear. It's almost like a folk melody. So I guess let's play the first MP3 in the Juno folder. I'll let you know very quickly if you played the wrong file. So this is the first time you hear it. That's when you're approaching this tower, and that's where you're about to meet them. So I'm able to play it before we even really know who it's for. So then if you go to the next one, this is the end credits featuring this amazing singer from Mexico, Maluka, which was another one of these I just found on YouTube, basically. And she's unbelievable. And so I wrote. Again, it's one of those, like, the players, they don't know what they don't know, and this melody is all about what's to come, but I'm using it just as like an end credit song. So if you actually skip 2 and play the one that's labeled 2.5, if you would.
So we're in Banner Saga 2.
We're in Banner Saga 1's end credits. I just chose 2 different excerpts so I could decide right now. So here's that same melody, but as a vocal piece. So that's more obviously this melody. So if you play the next one then, this is from a scene in the very beginning of Banner Saga 2, which opens, it's kind of like Empire Strikes Back, where your giant climax is actually the opening. And much like the Battle of Hoth is the big be-all, end-all of Empire Strikes Back, similarly, there's a huge set piece at the very opening of Banner Saga 2 where the characters are being chased by this impossibly large army, and there's a canyon they have to cross. And that's the first time we see the power of these characters of Juno and Ivan, where he uses magic to like float rocks up and create a kind of temporary bridge, and you have to survive over the course of crossing this huge canyon. So I wrote this just way over the top cue that wheels out this theme in a you know, appropriately absurd way. So yeah, so the next one, please, number 3. Nice and Sunday, easy listening. And these games, by the way, are also ones where they never give me notes. They just let me, I just keep getting more and more like vicious, and they're cool, man, I love it. I mean, they're such dark games. I mean, they're basically about the end of the world, but instead of saving the world, it's about confronting death with dignity. So it's like, you know, it's already rather light and fluffy to begin with. So I guess if we plow right along, in the interest of time, I'll skip the other Banner Saga 2 instances and we'll move to our exclusive preview. Never before heard instances of how that theme shows up in Banner Saga 3. So if you go to the one labeled 5, this is where you'll hear Christina now. And she's playing a combination of 4 different like English horn and this bizarre thing it's like a mouthpiece and broken piece of crap. It's called a zaphoon. I mean, it's the most buzzy, nasally, it's like a broken saxophone. And that merged with like a bansuri and now I'm blanking on and a recorder, like a tenor recorder. And we hybridized those to become this new instrument, and you'll hear the theme starts to get super weird. And I won't say why because it's a spoiler. So let's hear 5. Of weird territory on this game. It's really different from the first 2. And let's just do, why don't you just do 6, 7, 8 in succession, and we'll just finish it. So that's more of the orchestra, obviously, handling the melody. And this is one of the big kind of payoff scenes. then finally, a last little bit of mayhem. Saxophones. So, gives you a sense. It's weird stuff.
Everybody's thinking what the story could be now.
I hope so. Well, you find out in July. It's really, and you mentioned the instrumentation. I mean, it's probably obvious, but this is a big orchestra that has no strings of any kind. There's no, other than occasional violin solo tracked separately. It's all winds, brass, percussion, like a college wind band kind of sound. By design, all 3 games were done that way. It was really, and all 3, I mean, the third one had air, but the first 2 were recorded with concert orchestras in their concert halls with mobile recording rigs, which was also wildly unlike anything I'd ever done before.
It gives it its unique identity, though, doesn't it? I mean, like, you know if somebody's playing Banner Saga when you hear the music. Do you know what I mean?
We certainly hope, but I'll trust you on that.
Well,
So. It's always the hope.
One of the other things I really liked about the Banner Saga, because when you play the game, it's very clear. The game's sort of like very much compartmentalized. So you'll get a cutscene, then you'll get the dialogue, then you'll get the turn.
Right, sure, yeah. The game modes are very kind of segregated.
And it's very similar each time. And it'd be very easy to actually drop into on one of these, we're going to play one of these cues, and then I'll switch at this next section. And when I was playing it, I was trying to be a bit of a geek and work out how things were being implemented. And I was like, as I was writing it down, I was like, oh no, they've done it differently now. Like over some, you'd actually play a continuous cue over all of them. Sometimes you change, sometimes the section would have no music. How did you make all those choices? Because I was like, damn, that was a really good idea.
Thank you. I'm thrilled that that's apparent. I mean, for me, it's always about story. It's always about the characters, sort of psychoanalyzing the characters and what's their experience like. And so if your characters are in a specific kind of moment, but that moment happens to stretch across a bit of travel into some combat, then the music should do so accordingly. But if the start of a battle means a huge shift, like if we were in the middle of a romantic scene and a battle interrupts that, well, likewise, the music should reflect that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To me, music is entirely about informing the subtext, and the subtext is being driven by what's actually happening. So to me, mechanics, or by extension, location, that sort of thing. And I mean location in the very literal sense. Like, the classic would be, a Zelda game or any other kind of RPG where you have, your merchant or your town that you go back to. And it's one of my biggest pet peeves ever when you keep going back to a location. It's just the same cue over and over and over and over again. As much as some of those cues, like you think of Gerudo Valley from Ocarina of Time or whatever, some of those little islands of music have become quite beloved. I think they're bad storytelling, because if I go to Gerudo Valley as Link at the beginning of the game and then I come back 20 hours later as like Link who's seen shit, man, Gerudo Valley shouldn't feel the same. It's a different thing now, and so to me that storytelling should be at the forefront of every decision you make. And so often I'm saying, if there is no narrative significance of a place the first time I go to it, what if there's no music? What if the music has to be earned? Or if nothing else, the music should change quite a lot. And of course, on Assassin's Creed, you can imagine this was a big challenge because it is an open world game. And so we tied a lot of the location-specific music to the narrative, where it had multiple versions of a cue depending on where you were within the narrative when you went there, which required a lot of extra music to be able to do. But that, to me, it was like, okay, this way, at least if I get into a fight in front of this pub, in front of, Buckingham Palace, not that there's a proliferation of pubs in front of Buckingham Palace, but you know what I mean? If it's at the beginning of the game where all the enemies are going to be super high level beyond me versus at the end, that should where I am on par with them now. That's a very different emotional experience for Jacob and Evie. And it's the same in the Banner Saga. Even though that's a much more linear, it's not open world by any means, still, that's the modus operandi for me on all projects, film, game, whatever. It's how am I joining with these storytellers to help their storytelling
Yeah.
and make the music very dogmatically about that.
When it comes to
Except Deformers had no story.